Hello and welcome back to Goatman Philosophy. It's your boy Byron and with my friend Nate. And I want you to guess who's with us today. Obviously, it's in the title, but of course, it's Friedrich Nietzsche. Take a look at this. It's kind of impressionistic, I guess, for lack of a better word. And I probably had this book for like 10 years. It's actually a compilation book of other texts, including Ecce Homo, which is also included in Nate's version.
I don't have the face this time.
Sure. What is that on the cover? It's like a tree and a man.
Tree and a man.
And the man is laying on his side.
Must be some reference.
I guess.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. But anyway, we're here to talk about the genealogy of morals. So I want to note that in the preface, Nietzsche expects the reader to be familiar with Beyond Good and Evil. And I have read Beyond Good and Evil before, and I'm used to thinking of it as an aphoristic book, like a very bite-sized, chunky, separable type of book. But it is, based on the title, it is supposed to be part of Nietzsche's greater vision prior to him writing and attempting to write The Will to Power. And as you may or may not know, Nietzsche was not able to finish The Will to Power. He collapsed into insanity, witnessing the beating of a horse, and he had pity on the horse, and he cried for the horse. But anyway, the Genealogy of Morals is actually a very important book to me, and but before I get into that, I wanted to ask you, Nate, what introductory comments you'd want to have.
Well, mainly, after reading Hegel, or not that we read too much Hegel, but it was too much. Mainly, yeah, it's so refreshing to read a book that's like you can actually understand. It's actually interesting.
Yes.
Entertaining. So I'm pretty happy. You could I unfortunately I didn't I got distracted, so I didn't get too far into the first essay. But it's definitely the kind of book you could just read it straight through, probably. I mean, you're not gonna understand every detail of what he's saying. His sentences too are very densely packed, but it's entertaining enough to where you could do that,
Yes, and I think he uses some visual language, some analogies or metaphors, and he makes references to the senses, like these people smell bad, or there's a bad smell about other people's philosophy or the way other people think. These people smell like cowards, something to that effect. That's not necessarily in this book, but that's something I remember reading before and hearing. I think it might be in the Genealogy. But anyway, this is kind of getting tangential. So, I wanted to mention this book is actually very important to me in particular, and the style is more comprehensible than Hegel. Probably Nietzsche's style is probably more comprehensible than most philosophers on average. And even though he is specifically in a modern era reacting to other people, and he will make explicit references to people like Kant or Schopenhauer, but that is better than the indirect references Hegel makes. Hegel, in his style, he is making indirect references to other people without specifying who he's talking about. And so for those of us who are not familiar with his context, it's much harder to actually understand what's going on. We have to just take a lot of things on face value and just have a very vague, abstract imagination about things. And it's very hard to articulate or capture any explicit lessons from what we read in the phenomenology. And so, what was your impression of this book so far?
Well, to be honest, I had a question I wanted to ask you.
Okay.
I was asking earlier.
Sure.
To be honest, so far, the things I've gotten out of it would be not so much the overall main thesis he's talking about. I mean, this is something you were saying in our past videos. It's
Yes.
the small pieces. I think that is definitely true for Nietzsche. some of his quotes, I'm like, oh, that's so good. You
Mm.
know, like for example, I'll just read one of them.
Sure.
He says like, but to me, on the contrary, there seems to be nothing more worth taking seriously. Among the rewards for it being that someday one will perhaps be allowed to take them cheerfully.
Mm.
For cheerfulness, or in my own language, gay science, is a reward, the reward of a long, brave, industrious, and subterranean seriousness, of which, to be sure, not everyone is capable.
Mm.
But mainly just the idea that, like, the cheerfulness is the reward for the prolonged, like, seriousness. Like, I like that, and I find that to be pretty true.
I think so.
That's just, like, one example, but...
Right.
Things like that. So, yeah, I like the specific, you know, he understands, like, human nature really, like, at a really, really detailed level. Like,
Yes.
Beyond my understanding. So, like, I have a lot to learn.
Yeah, I think it's very likely that Nietzsche was not even able to fully express himself. Like, he probably had images in his mind or thoughts that he couldn't write it all down. I think that's very likely. I think in his later period, it seemed like he was publishing like one book a year, if not more. And that's a lot of output with considering the amount of depth and style to it. He was likely exerting his brain to a high extent, which probably correlated with his insanity in 1890, sorry. So, you said you wanted to ask me a question.
Oh, yeah. So I was kind of curious. I mean, one thing I would say, like, reading this... Well, you mentioned you shared, like, the book with some friends, and I was kind of thinking, well, I enjoy the book, but I'm also thinking, like, maybe it's not, like, there's a good chance it's not relevant to them. You know, it's like thinking about the value of values, and I guess, like, how the powerful have manipulated language. That seems pretty relevant to everyone.
Sure.
But I was kind of just curious, like, what does this book mean to you, and why do you think it's important, or why do you think, like, it would be worth people's time to read it too? Yeah.
Right. Well, first I want to say that, you know, compared to Hegel, I'm a bit more compatible with Nietzsche's broader vision in terms of the beyond good and evil concept and this type of transcendence that he's talking about. And to be more specific, I think each of the three essays, but especially the first and second essays of this book, are very relevant to how I've been living my life and what I think should be done in our society and how we should conduct ourselves. So I take the first essay is actually very relevant to how I live my life, and I've been basing my behavior off the first essay of the Genealogy. So, for example, there's a claim that a nobleman is someone who does what they say that they'll do, no matter what, and that they're careful to make promises. And a slave or a less honorable, less noble person is someone who lies. And so I now consider each person who lies to be less noble for it, and I consider it necessary for me to tell as few lies as possible to maintain my own nobility and to be a noble myself. And additionally, I think I have to be careful about making promises, because every time that I fail to uphold a promise, that makes me less noble as a human being, as a man. And so that leads me being very careful with how I talk. People, even for minor things, like, for example, my boss might say, hey, can you send these emails out by this day? And I'd be like, oh, well, that's something that I think is a good idea. I hope to accomplish that, rather than saying that I will do it. Because I know that the way I live my life and the way things happen, I could easily get distracted playing some game or watching a YouTube video or something and not write the emails. And so that's just a minor example. And then I could speak more, but there's like two more parts to answering your earlier question, but I want to give you a chance to respond to that.
Well, I'm just curious because so this noble, I guess he's like, so I haven't made it too far into the first essay yet on this rereading. So he's kind of talking about like how the people in power kind of who are the nobles, they define like what is good. They can, they control the language. So is he basically like, he's like, I'm gonna give my own definition of what is nobility. This is different from like what maybe you may have heard, or
sure.
That's kind of what
I think
his definition of nobility is like his,
I think
his definition.
Yeah, I think he's making his own definition of what it means to be a noble.
Yeah, because society definitely does not. I mean, they may not say it so openly, but like a lot of the things that are considered good, like just doing your job, rising the ranks, making a lot of money.
Yeah, I suppose it's bourgeois morality.
Having a lot of investments and things like that. Yeah, that might be kind of American nobility definition of good nowadays,
I suppose. And then I think that these people are not compatible with Nietzsche's definition to the extent that they lie. So, like, for example, I consider Elon Musk to be a liar. And then I think there are other people who are liars.
What's an example of Elon?
So, for example, I could be wrong on the details, but I believe that in 2019, or in a particular year, Elon Musk promised to have fully self-driving robo-taxis 2 years down the line. And then 2 years later came, and they're not even close to having fully self-driving robo-taxis. At the time, Elon Musk said something like, considering that we'll have this robo-taxi capability, it would be financially insane to buy anything other than a Tesla. It's pretty close to a verbatim quote. And considering issues like build quality and battery fires and things of that nature, it's kind of sus. It's not true. It's not a true statement. I, for example, still believe that we need to have gasoline vehicles to a large extent for a lot of different reasons. So that would be one example of him telling a lie. Yeah. So in that sense, he can't fully fit that definition of nobility. When I think of Nietzsche's definition of nobility, I really do imagine like a proper monarch or feudal lord or someone of that spirit.
Yeah.
Someone sitting at the king's throne with their sphere and their staff or their sword or whatever, and making their proclamations. And Nietzsche is almost able to ascribe like a metaphysical status to that someone holding that position, who holds it effectively, who holds it properly, who holds it honorably, if you will. And I think honor does correlate this idea of upholding your promises and your commitments. Yeah. Sure.
Makes sense, yeah.
Right. I could keep going about your previous question.
It's up to you. I mean, with Hegel, I came in just being like, this guy is my enemy, and I'm gonna tear him apart in every which way. For Nietzsche, I have a different attitude. So like, I don't have a ton to say. I mean, the main thing that makes me think about reading this is just, like the problems with current society and the fact that, the criticisms he makes are still totally true, if not more true now.
Yes.
And I like, and the fact that I like some of the specifics he says, but those are the main things I would have to talk about, I guess, personally.
Yeah, it's Nietzsche seemed like he had the ability to predict the future, Like he was able to anticipate the future, or inside what was going on around him in his time, he saw the seeds of what would flower to become even a more extreme version of itself today.
Yeah, totally.
Like the culture of pity, for example.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
So, for example, he notes, or he kind of anticipates this idea that there's too much pity in our society. And I agree with that. Like, for example, you see these people asking for money on the side of the road or on a sidewalk, and literally while there are open job positions at different places that these people would be able to do, in theory, at least.
Yep.
And that's what I think about every time I see such a person now. And it's a culture of pity that allows people to do drugs in facilitated areas, hard drugs, and the pity doesn't seem to count for true care. I think truly caring for these people is not necessarily the same as pity.
For a lot of people, it's like they have this belief. I mean, this is so common, like that other people need their help. They, we have money. The poor people, they need my help. So you see this with the ads, with like white people kissing the little African baby. Donate your money because they need your help.
Right.
In reality, of course, like, I mean, this is just a total. I mean, the real reason people do this is because it helps them feel good about themselves. They have a belief that it's like, I mean, most people are not really living the life they want to live, and they have to like wipe their tears with the money they make from their job that they don't like that much. I mean, statistics nowadays, like America is like the second highest rates of depression in the world, second only to Ukraine, which is a war-torn nation. The 10 lowest are like all what are considered third world countries. So it's like Tonga, Papua New Guinea. So it's like, what are you like? Are you really helping them?
If they're more happy than you.
Yeah, and a lot of time, like a lot of their problems too are like were created by America or like the global financial system. It's like these countries, they find some corrupt individuals in the countries to like, they cut a deal and the country becomes indebted, and now like these bigger countries have an excuse to kind of do whatever they want because like, the smaller country has a debt to them. So I think it's just stupid, and that happens too even with like the homeless person. It's like, I mean, okay, like don't get me wrong, I think some unfortunate sequence of events happened and they're forced to that state, and it's good to give them money. Like some people do give out of compassion, and so, I think, and I guess the worst thing is like looking away, which I know I'm guilty of. A lot of people, our whole society is like guilty of that. Like looking away is bad because a lot of these people really are like suffering. But that being said, yeah, I think some people, especially when there's like this sort of, when it's done in a kind of like alienated way, especially with like the ads and you're donating money to some organization.
Sure.
Those are where the real problems lie, I think. And those organizations are kind of like tend to be like a money grab, and this is just part of their strategy, but that's a bit of a tangent, but.
Sure. I mean, I could say a lot based on what you said. I mean, I want to mention this, despite how random it is compared to the original topic, but I've made friends from Africa, and I think that they have better mental health than we do. Like, I think they have a higher natural baseline happiness. Like, I think they have higher immunity to depression and anxiety. I think they have better mental health than we do. It seems like they're more likely to believe in God and just straight up. Like, I knew this guy from Rwanda, and he said that, you know, I'm going to paraphrase. Basically, if he gets depressed, he just has to eat his favorite food, and then he's not depressed anymore. And then, like, one time I was trying to tell him the reasons why God doesn't exist, or why there's no evidence for God, or something like that. And he's like, come on, man, just believe in God. Like, it's simple. And I was like, okay. I mean, that's the point I got to, but he was like ahead of me. Like, I have to respect that. Like, you know, he was ahead of the curve. Just believe in God, bro. And so, like, they have better. This man I'm speaking of, he had better mental health than Nietzsche. That's for sure. And I think I don't want to say too much yet, but I thought that was worth mentioning. Yeah. But I wanted to speak more on the book.
But yeah, also the point about pity, and he's making the broader point that he sees like people saying they're encouraging people not to live. You know? It's like an anti-life kind of philosophy. You know, like the things that are actually like give people joy and meaning and you know, all these other positive, you know, emotions and things like that. It's like are actually being kind of discouraged. Yeah, it's kind of sounded like what he's talking about. Yeah, and he definitely predicted. I mean, that's definitely totally still going on. I mean, now we have like AI technology and all this kind of stuff, which is like almost like a massive gaslighting campaign. It's like it's trying to say, you know, a lot of people believe that we are our brains, and our brains are like computers, and like these computers are, you know, alive, when in reality it's just this, you know, they're controlled by people, and the whole system that's building this stuff is mostly just trying to accumulate wealth, and it's not like promoting human thriving and those kinds of things. But that's a bit, you know. But I mean, but basically these things are non-living, and we're trying to say that they are living, and we're trying to it's a kind of like gaslighting, saying that like life is not life, and trying to reduce life to the non-living, I guess you could say.
Sure.
That's obviously a very complicated thing to explain, but
yeah, I think I'm generally an opponent of reductionism in general. I noticed that tendency at least a few years ago. When I hear someone talk about, oh, we're just a big rock flying through nothingness, or the universe, like, I think that's cringe, basically. And that's reductionism, and people act as if it's arbitrary that we live on this earth, and that we made it this far. And you know, theoretically, like this reality that we live could have been the product of random chance, but it's hard to believe. We've tried to search the universe for the potential of other lives, and it's so rare. These scientists are just looking for the chance of it. We're speculating. Maybe we find some fossils of some bacteria, but you know, for this conscious life that we live, it's so unique, and people don't give that the proper respect it deserves, in my opinion. But anyway, I feel like that's a tangent as well.
Okay, so bring us back to the book.
Yes, back to the book. So you asked me about what the book means, and I spoke on the first essay. And then for the second essay is about guilt. Guilt and debt, and there are a lot of important ideas in the second essay, and I think we'll get more deep into this later. But for example, I think there are two core ideas I want to emphasize right now. The first is the idea that guilt comes from the concept of debt, and in German the two words are very similar to each other. And I think even in older English or in other similar languages, guilt or guild was a type of money or even meant debt itself. And it's just something that we might have lost in our usage of the language. And I think if we think about how guilt arises in the mind, it is similar to debt. So we tend to feel guilt when we did something bad. And, Dr. K on Healthy Gamer GG said that the guilt comes first and then the guilty thoughts come after the emotion. And so I think that's applicable. And Nietzsche says that the guilty conscience that we have today is the product of hundreds of years of evolution. And that evolution was induced through punishment. People had to be violently and cruelly, brutally punished for their crimes. And he said that it was through violent punishment that human beings developed a better sense of memory. And it relates to the first essay in the sense that people had to be punished through pain to develop the ability to make and keep their own promises. Even when we have contracts and laws today, it's under the threat of force. Even theoretically, a parking ticket could result in your death if you are defiant enough about it. If they press the issue and you don't comply. So the power of the government is always backed through violence. And
or not even the government. I mean, this is a human, especially because, the government, but just people and tribes, it's like, you cross one set of people, they're going to come back at you later,
Right.
Yeah.
I'll go to the cafe and with my property, I'll be in a vulnerable position. Like someone could come up and just ambush me. Mm-hmm. And then I go out in public and I wonder to myself, why don't people attack me? Why am I not being attacked? What's stopping people from attacking me?
That's true. But I mean, it's not. But there is I assume he would say there is a rationality to it. It's not like pure chaos. Mm-hmm. It's like if you owe a debt or then it makes sense.
Sure.
And you may store that. I think we talked about this maybe a couple of weeks ago. Some I've heard even dogs will tend to if you're walking down the street and you're angry or have something bad in your heart, dogs will be more likely to bark at you or something like that,
Sure. As if you smell different or something.
So people can, and animals can kind of tell, I guess you could say. But it's not random.
Yeah.
I think random violence is it's not really a thing.
Yeah.
So much, It's also this is a controversial issue.
Yeah.
Let's stir up some YouTube controversy.
I'm ready.
Even school shootings. There's a reason why they happen. Well, they tend to happen in the suburbs. They tend to be a lot of times they're at schools. Mm-hmm. I mean, these people are very unwell and angry, and obviously I don't condone what they're doing. That's not a productive way to fix whatever problems they have. But that being said, there is viewed as a phenomenon. Let's just analyze this. The phenomenon of shootings. There's a specific. It tends to happen in the suburbs. It tends to be white and males. Mm-hmm. It tends to happen at schools. There's a reason why they target these places. It's because they were treated very that's
it's the place of resentment.
It's the place of resentment. That's a good way of putting it. I don't remember what my point was, but
I'll build on that. So there was this guy named Nicholas Cruz, I think, who shot up a school, and then he tried to blend in with the other students after he did his shooting, and then the police caught him, and then when he was getting interrogated, he tried to pretend to be crazy, but he couldn't pull it off because they had him under surveillance cameras. And he just had this misinformed impression that if he just pretended to be crazy, that he would get pity or something, or he would just easily get let off for what he did. But like he just didn't have an understanding of the law. The insanity plea is actually very limited in how it can be used. You specifically have to be so insane that you cannot stand trial, and that's different from being so insane that it caused you to commit the crime. And even if you are considered labeled insane, the punishment for insanity may be worse than the punishment for sanity. You might rather go to prison than an insane asylum. It's hard to say. But Nicholas Cruz, like I looked at his face, like very bluntly speaking, he was an ugly guy, and he was probably in a very like negative, toxic environment, and he was probably very repulsive to women. Mm-hmm. Women probably felt very unsafe around him and unattracted. Mm-hmm. And so he was living a cold life, and he probably didn't have a father at home, for all I would guess. And so he was the vehicle of resentment. He was the vessel of resentment, and he shot that resentment out with a firearm, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep.
But anyway,
it's just physics. Like every action is equal opposite reaction. Conservation of energy.
Right.
So, we're physical beings, and we at a very, very high level, and we kind of follow these same rules. You can't just like sweep problems under the rug and expect them to magically disappear. That's not how life works.
Well, I would rather speak in terms of causality, because I think it's more general than physics.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense too.
I think there's non-physical causality. I think that's a real thing. I think non-physical causality was a major aspect of, that shooting scenario, or almost everything really.
All that stuff is physical though. All the effects of his family, his upbringing, emotions, it's all...
I'm just worried about that being like reductionistic.
Yeah, I don't want to be reductionistic, but yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Now, to be fair, I was not expecting to be on this topic right now. So I was speaking on the second essay, which is focused on guilt, and this idea, this guilty conscience, this tendency towards guilt that we have now is not apparently the natural state of man. The theory is that this concept of feeling so much guilt is the product of hundreds of years of violent punishment on criminals. For example, Nietzsche really believes that violent punishment is a core principle of how societies evolved over time. So he believes that in Europe, people used to be much more savage, but through violent punishment and lethal punishment, they were able to neutralize the criminals and remove them basically from the gene pool and basically domesticate the Europeans through violence. And so that the European we see now is the result of hundreds of years of domestication through executions and whippings and things of that nature. Anyway, so...
And that's built up a collective guilt for...
Sure. And so like they have this sense of guilt through punishment.
Or when you do something wrong, you'll feel guilty because you're kind of like knowing that there's a chance that punishment awaits.
Yeah, it's the guilt is now so deep that we're not specifically conscious of being punished for our crimes.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And so at first it was a very external thing, and now it's become internalized.
I see.
Right.
That makes sense. This is like the concept of like white guilt.
It could be related.
It's related. I mean, related. I mean.
Yeah, it's.
He's got a more. He's he's giving a whole like historical
Mhm.
explanation for it, but I was just meaning it's related to that.
Yeah, he's you could say he's explaining why white people and maybe other groups could feel so guilty if they have such a legacy of torture to their own people. And anyway, I was planning to say something else.
Go for it.
Anyway, so I think that another core concept in the second essay is that every crime committed incurs a debt, and every debt can be paid off. And so, you know, if it's not possible to like pay back a certain amount of value lost, then the last thing someone has to give is their own suffering. And so Nietzsche argues that suffering has been used as a type of currency to make good on certain debts incurred through crime. So he might argue that like the public torture or execution of a person is a way of paying off their debt that they committed through their crime. And so for me, like I look at you know, how we conduct ourselves now, and I think that to some extent we could apply some of these ideas in our own justice system. And I think we should have the idea that people are in debt, and then they have to pay off their debt, and that basically like the pain inflicted or prison time for its own sake or by itself, imprisonment without labor, these things would be things that we'd have to resort to if there's no way for the criminal to like make good on their debt that they've accrued. Like if there's some way for a criminal to pay off his debt then that's basically would best fit this idea of justice or punishment and restitution. I'll take a pause there.
So, I agree with that. I'm curious though, like Nietzsche's point, because he's saying, or you mentioned like he's saying maybe this is not like the natural way that man is. Like, is this? Are you saying? Can we ever get rid of this? I guess, or like, is it more like it's kind of like an equilibrium thing, and you just gotta maintain the equilibrium, you know, something like that, you know, just if there's always like, because I mean, you do something wrong, it causes wrong, you know, but I guess it can be, and it's natural to want to undo that somehow. I don't know, but I don't know. Does that make sense? What I'm asking you?
At least part of it. So I have to admit, you know, I can't say that Nietzsche's addressed this explicitly. So he talks about how the guilty conscience was developed through time, but I can't say that he has or has not addressed this idea of reversing the guilty conscience, of like, could we have human beings in the future at least who don't feel this way? And if it took hundreds of years for us to develop this psychology, it could take hundreds of years to undo it. And you know, make that either that would count as degeneration into a lower state like what we used to be, or it could be part of a Nietzschean style transcendence. And Nietzsche, one of his main ideas is a type of transcendence out of our current form into some higher form. Now, I'm not sure how we could undo the guilty conscience. I mean, maybe with a lack of punishment. If we had the opposite of that punishment, if we had a really lax system, maybe that would undo the guilty conscience. It's hard to say. It's possible. And I think also it fits this idea of going beyond good and evil. And I think, you know, we're going to be at a slight disadvantage for not having read that book immediately before this book. But I think we can go back to Beyond Good Evil later and cover that. And I think in other texts, such as The Will to Power or Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche might have spoken